Beyond. Some people call them ghosts or spirits, but to Reverend Keith, it was a normal part of life. It was these experiences that made Reverend Keith want to learn more about this unseen world. As a young child, he used to spend hours reading every book that he could find on the spirit world. And the more he read, the more fascinated he became in learning about this magical place, including mediumship and spiritualism. For many years, Reverend Keith was in search of a church that felt right. And once he entered the sanctuary at the Center of Enlightenment in 2006, he knew that this was the place for him. Since the Center of Enlightenment has always been a special place to his family, it felt right to marry his beautiful wife, Fiona, in this very church on October 3rd, 2009. Over the years, Reverend Keith has served on the board of directors in many roles as trustee, vice president, and president. In February 2016, he was ordained as a minister at the Center of Enlightenment, and in February 20, appointed as senior minister by Reverend Keith Novichevsky. Please welcome Reverend Keith Norton.
Thank you, Reverend David. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Welcome to May. It's hard to believe it's May 1st. So this past semester in the winter term in school, I took a course called Interpersonal Communication. And interpersonal communication essentially means a conversation between two or more people. The textbook we used was called Interpersonal Communication, a Mindful Approach to Relationships by Jason S. Wrench, Suni New Peltz, Narissa M. Punian, Texas Tech University, and Catherine S. Thwat, SUNY Oswego. Are you listening to me or just hearing what I'm saying? That's what my sermon is about. Are you hearing me or listening to me? In week 7 of class, we specifically talked about the difference between hearing and listening. According to the authors, hearing refers to a passive activity when an individual perceives sound by detecting vibrations through the air. Hearing is a psychological process that's continually happening. We are bombarded by sounds all the time. External noises are a good example. Traffic nearby, the birds singing, the sound of a refrigerator kicking on, the sound of the air conditioning kicking on. Our mind will actually tune those out. And these are just samples of the hundreds of sounds that we hear every day. And unless you are in a soundproof room or 100% deaf, we are constantly hearing sounds whether we're aware of them or not. Even in a soundproof room, other sounds that normally not heard, like a beating heart or breathing, still become apparent as a result of the blocked background noise. And that one resonated with me because it was really weird. Fiona and I, a couple of years ago, went into a float tank, and it's a sensory deprivation tank where you're completely suspended by Epsom salt. You're in a completely dark pod with no sound. And the only thing you can hear is your breathing and heartbeat. And it's really, at first, it's kind of unnerving. I was really shocked that it was, but it's interesting. So listening, on the other hand, is generally seen as an active process. Listening is focused, concentrated attention, but for the purpose and understanding of the meaning expressed by a source. From this perspective, hearing is more of an automated response when your ear perceives information, whereas listening happens when we purposely attend to different messages. We even take this one step further and differentiate between normal listening from critical listening. Critical listening is the careful systemic thinking and reasoning to see whether a message makes sense in light or factual evidence. From this perspective, it's the one thing to attend to somebody's messages, but something very different to analyze what the person is saying based on facts and evidence. There are 6 stages in this act of listening, known as the Hurrier model of listening. The 6 stages are represented by the following. Hearing is represented by the ear. The brain represents the next 4 stages. A person's mouth represents the final stage. Stage 1, hearing. Are you truly listening to what is being said or are simply hearing words? To fully engage in a mindful listening, it is important to take hearing seriously because of the issue of intention. If we go into an interaction with another person without really intended to listen what they have to say, we may end up being a passive listener who does nothing more than hearing and nodding our heads. And that is actually commonly, it is a phenomena that even like one of the examples in our class, we watched a TED Talk and the speaker was saying that if you're in an interview and the person interviews you and you give a long-winded answer, a lot of times that interviewer will ask a question that was already answered in that long dialogue just because their mind wandered. It happens to even professionals. Stage 2, understanding. The second stage of the listening model is understanding, or the ability to comprehend or decode the source's message. Simply decoding is when we attempt to break down the message we've heard into comprehensible meanings. Stage 3, remembering. Once we've decoded a message, we have to actually remember the message itself, or the ability to recall a message that was sent. We are bombarded by messages throughout our day, so it's completely possible to attend to a message and decode it and then forget about it 2 seconds later. 4, interpreting. Interpreting messages involves attention to all the various speaker and contextual variables that provide a background for accurately perceived messages. A lot of the interpreting process is being aware of the nonverbal cues, both oral and physical, that accompany a message to accurately assign meaning to the message. And that was one thing that I really didn't realize, how much nonverbal communication occurs, like even in simple dialogue. There's a whole video that the History Channel did. It was like an hour-long special on nonverbal communication. And they have people that specialize in nonverbal communication break down like even how politicians try to trump one another, and by the who has the upper hand, who is positioned on the left side, who's positioned on the right side. A simple pat on the back is a sign of dominance over somebody. It's actually quite interesting. Step 5, evaluation. The next stage is the evaluation stage, or judging the message itself. One of the biggest hurdles many people have with listening in the evaluative stage. Our personal biases, values, and beliefs can prevent us from effectively listening to someone else's messages. That's a tough one to get past a lot of times, because one of the things we always do is tend to jump to the conclusion right away without actually hearing what is being said. When it comes to evaluating another person's message, it is important to remember to be mindful. Too often we start to evaluate others' messages with an analytical or cold quality that is unethical to be mindful. 6, responding. It's important to realize that effective listening starts with an ear and centers in the brain, and then only should someone provide feedback to the message itself. Often people jump from hearing to understanding, or from hearing and understanding to responding, which can cause problems as they jump to conclusions that have arisen by truncated interpretation or evaluation. Basically, they don't process it. They just go right from hearing it to responding. Ultimately, how we respond to a source's message will dictate how the rest of the interaction will progress. If we outright dismiss what somebody is saying, we put up a roadblock and say, I don't want to hear anything else. On the other hand, if we nod our heads and say, tell me more, then we are encouraging the speaker to continue the interaction. For effective communication to occur, it's essential to consider how our responses will impact the other person's and our relationship with the other person. Overall, when it comes to being a mindful listener, it's vital to remember the acronym of COAL. C is curiosity, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. O is openness. A is acceptance, and L is love. When we engage in COAL, we can listen mindfully when we're in the moment. So in reviewing the 6 steps, stage 1 is hearing, 2 is understanding, 3 is remembering, 4 is interpreting, 5 is evaluating, 6 is responding. Sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it? Isn't that what we do when we open ourselves up to mediumship? First, we attempt to hear the message Spirit is giving us as mediums. Second, we attempt to understand the message. Next, we try to remember what it is so we can relay the message to the person receiving that message. The next stage is interpreting it, or trying to figure out what the message really is. Once we interpret the message, then we evaluate the message. Does it feel right? Does it make sense? Is it for the right person? Once we completed all those steps, then we give the message to the receiver of the message, or in other words, respond. And this is probably the hardest part of learning mediumship, listening to the messages of spirit and trying to interpret them and relay them in the receiver, all in a matter of a few seconds. And that's why a lot of times when you see mediums who are just learning mediumship, they get up here and they'll go, okay, I've got so-and-so here. And then they'll stop and pause, and you get that silence. That's that process of listening to that message, evaluating it, understanding it, processing it basically before they give you the message. It does get easier over time though. I really believe that if everyone used these 6 steps and actually listening to people instead of rapid fire responses in their answers, the world would become a much more enjoyable place. There's another technique that we learned about in the class given by in a TED Talk by an attorney by the name of Kwame Christian. Kwame Christian is an attorney who specializes in conflict resolution. Remember I talked about compassion in the word Cole? He uses a technique called compassionate curiosity. Here's how it works. Let's say we're involved in a conversation or discussion that has taken it to a next level and the tension has really risen and could boil over at any moment. Instead of adding fuel to the fire, what if we turn the tide in the discussion by simply asking the questions like, what can we do to help you resolve this issue? Or is this really what bothering you? Or is it something else? Or why do you feel about this situation in the way you do? What this does to the conversation is that it introduces what therapists and experts call a distractor. It breaks the escalation cycle and forces the person to think about the question that is now in front of them instead of all the pre-canned answers that they've already stored up. So it breaks that cycle. In his TED Talk, Kwame talks about how we engaged in a difficult court case, or how he engaged in a difficult court case. And he used this technique to change the direction of the discussions. They were getting heated, and it was a discussion about a contract that was involved in this court. And the guy was getting, I don't remember the other side, I'll say, I don't remember if it was the defendant or the whatever. But he asked him, he goes, so what can we do to help you make this contract work for you? And he said, by the end of the conversation, that took the edge off of the tension that was about to boil over. And by the end of the conversation, they both came to terms that they agreed on, and they were actually laughing at the discussion and took the tension away. Total win-win. And again, if everyone were to use this method, I think the world would be better off. Now, what if you combine both techniques? How powerful would that be? Imagine for a moment if you ask someone how their day is going and they reply, it's horrible, nothing but trouble. Do you just hear them and say, oh, I'm sorry, try to have a better day? Or do you ask, do you want to talk about it? Did you hear what is being said, or are you truly listening to the tone of their voice and how they respond to you? So suppose by them saying it's horrible, nothing but trouble, they're really asking for help indirectly. What if they're in an abusive relationship or don't want to ask for help out of fear of retaliation, or they have issues they really aren't sure how to handle or approach anybody about? Perhaps by asking if they want to talk about it, they might open up a little bit and let their guard down, and you'll be able to get them the help and head them in the direction that they truly need and are too afraid to ask for. This simple question could go on to possibly saving somebody's life. And as ministers, we're taught to look out for this and handle situations like this. In closing today, I really hope you were listening to my sermon today and not hearing what is being said. For those that you were truly listening, thank you. For those that were only hearing what I said, I would recommend that you go back and listen to the sermon again once it's posted to YouTube. But I know all of you were truly listening, and for that I say thank you.